jobs taken. Now it's different if you're talking about asset creation, music, animation, 3D models. Artificial intelligence does seem more creating static assets or even dynamic assets, but designing interactivity, architecting layers of experience, understanding pacing, player psychology, difficulty scaling, integrating all of those things together into an experience. That's nothing AI can't do anything like that. So, at the moment, I don't think that we need to start giving advice to game designers whose jobs are impacted by AI. It might be impacted by the downturn in the industry, but that's a different kind of advice.
That question, in Brazil, when we talk about games and education, people say that's boring. In USA, games and education is boring or not?
Who's saying it's boring? The students are not saying it's boring. Students say that it's boring? Well, the funny thing is, if you put a game in a classroom, even if it's a bad educational game, it's going to be more fun than sitting and watching a teacher give a lecture. So I guess, but I do think that part of the point you're making is that educational games
are different than entertaining games.
Well, there's still a challenge there. I mean, let's look at, for example, the way literature is used in classrooms, right? Like in America, we study English literature by William Shakespeare's plays from the audiences for William Shakespeare, and that's not an educational play. His plays are just works of art and works of culture that get integrated into classrooms, often in very interactive ways. For example, people acting out characters, putting on plays, right? As well as analyzing, talking about it, maybe using it as an inspiration to write their own plays. So I think that there's, the problem with educational games is that often they're just used as kind of interactive quizzes or something, as opposed to really leveraging what's great about games that we all love, and in an educational context, whether those games are designed to be educational or whether those games are just fun commercial games that a teacher is cleverly integrating into the classroom experience. So a lot of it has to do with the challenges of integrating media into the classroom.
This event with Games for Change in Latin America, the foundation of new institution. And what do you think about the histories of indie game developers in Brazil? Is any history that claims your attention?
Well, I don't know. I can't speak much about the history of independent games in Brazil. What can you teach me about that?
Independent games in Brazil have a lot of obstacles, like taxes, a lack of public institutions during financial stability. But the scene is changing. Do you think it's similar to the USA?
Well, one thing that I will say about Brazil is that there's a lot of places in the world where there are not giant game studios, right, that are the center. Not every place is like Montreal or Vancouver, where it's sort of dominated by large studios, even Los Angeles or Seattle. I guess I would say that there's lots of interesting places in the world where, because there are giant studios, sometimes there's a more interesting ecosystem that can evolve, right? So even I was just in India, and it's a lot of mobile development and small development and sort of academic research, educational games. Even in New York City, which I realize is very, very different than Brazil in many, many ways. But the interesting thing about the ecosystem in New York City is also that there's no AAA development studios. So it's a lot of people.
It's like a middle and small.
Yeah, medium and small sized companies, and a lot of people figuring out out how can I make games here. So sometimes they're working with advertising agencies or with media companies. Sometimes they are doing educational things, or they're teaching game design, and then on the side they're doing their indie game projects, right? But there's a lot of community development and a lot of things that sort of overlap with other parts of culture and education. And I actually think in some ways it could be an advantage, right?
Because more companies.
Just a more diverse ecosystem.
Yeah.
Rather than an ecosystem that's dominated by
Ubisoft.
Yeah, exactly. And making very conventional games. When a small and medium-sized company has to survive, they're more likely to have innovative. So there's the potential to be a really interesting work as a result. Brazil is so rich as a cultural mecca, really, for the whole world. So I recently, has nothing to do with this trip, but about a month ago I started studying capoeira.
Oh!
And I thought I was going to be studying a martial art, but guess what? I'm also studying dancing, music, percussion instruments, singing in Portuguese, which I don't speak, but I now have to sing it.
You can sing, but you can't speak.
Well, I mean, I'm trying, so I'm learning. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that there's an interesting way that we see many forms of culture, just like the sort of all of the different cultural influences in Brazil blend and mix and change and evolve with each other. I feel like many forms of culture do that as well, like music and dance and martial arts. And I wonder if there's a way for games to somehow find their way into that sort of flow of culture that happens here in Brazil. And I don't know, but maybe that's the challenge for games. And I will say that it's probably better that it's not a few giant game companies. It's maybe more nimble, more diverse, more diverse, more scrappy, more independent kinds of game companies will have an easier time doing that. But the potential is really incredible.
Excellent. I'm glad to hear you, Eric Zimmerman, here in São Paulo for Drops de Jogos. Pessoal, obrigado pela presença de vocês aqui todos. Curte, compartilhe o nosso vídeo. Thank you, Eric.
Thanks a lot.
Good trip for you. Bye bye.